All right, so for 2022 boom or bust players that we're looking at here, these are all players going over to a new team either through a trade or free agency. So Sterling, start us off with a boom player.
Well, one of my big boom players was Marquez Valdes-Scantling. He's coming over from the Green Bay Packers, and he's taking the role essentially of Tyreek Hill in Kansas City. And we saw some flashes from him in Green Bay when he was playing with Aaron Rodgers, but obviously he was behind Devontae Adams, and so often was overlooked in key situations because, you know, third and need to get a first down, you're going to throw it to Devontae Adams before Valdez Scantling. But going to KC now with that speed that Scantling has and not having a superstar across from him, it's Juju Smith Schuster on the other side. And so I think they're going to offset each other nicely. And that attention is going to trend towards Juju, at least at the start of the season. And then we can't forget that Travis Kelsey is there in the middle of the field as well, that defenses can't forget about. So I think we're going to see Scantling getting a lot of the similar, screen quick out passes and then make a move and make things happen that way. And, he has not hit 10 touchdowns or 1,000 yards yet in a season. I think this is the first season we see him do both of those actually.
Playing in Green Bay for the last 4 years, obviously coming into the league as a 24-year-old, he always had to play with the likes of Devontae Adams, who is now with the Raiders. You know, throughout his career, he's put over 2,000 yards in the 4 years that he's played. His best year was back in 2020, where he got 690 yards, 6 touchdowns. 6 yards per reception was at 20.9. So the dude is quick. Like he was kind of that burner guy for the Packers offense there.
Yeah, which is
Again,
what I'm thinking going to KC. He's taken over that role now with Tyreek Hill being gone.
yeah. Well, and Casey does have some really really good offensive weapons there. Obviously, with Juju Smith-Schuster, the dude is a phenomenal route runner, and he's kind of like one of those more possession type of catchers. Obviously, they have Mikael Hardman, who was also kind of that Tyreek Hill super speedster. You just put the
Yep.
ball in his hands and let him work. Scantling, obviously a bit bigger, obviously being 6'4", 210 pounds. The dude is a big body, but can also just fly. So this is kind of one of those guys where you could use him in the red zone for a player that particularly just jumps up, catches the ball, comes down with it, Bob's your uncle type situation. Yeah, and I think obviously him signing a 3-year deal, like taking a look here at his numbers, signed a 3-year, $30 million contract with a signing bonus of 6 million. So he's making about 10 million per year.
Yep.
So I don't view this contract as terribly overpaid. Like from the production that we've seen from him and the numbers that wide receivers are getting nowadays, to me this looks like it's a perfect contract. And with the weapons still around him, Andy Reid obviously as the head coach and offensive play caller, he's going to be able to put this guy in positions to succeed. So like what you were saying, obviously with Juju Smith-Schuster there, McCole Hardman, and Travis Kelsey there are all really, really good options to kind of take a little bit of pressure off of him. Obviously, I think we're probably going to see his best performance probably earlier on in the season, just because they're going to be focusing more on some of these more known guys. So
Mhm.
again, when it comes to the deal and for what they're getting out of him, I think this is a good opportunity. Obviously, he is going to be entering the season as a 28-year-old, so he is getting a little bit up there in terms of the age for some of the wide receivers. But you know what? Let's say if he has another good 2 years, yeah, it's not a bad deal.
Nope.
So next player on our list for a boom type of player, I have Allen Robinson, obviously coming over from the Bears to the LA Rams. This was a move when it initially happened that I was a little bit shocked at, but I was also a massive fan of, because Allen Robinson, without a doubt, no matter how you cut it, he is a number one wide receiver in this league. He was a number one wide receiver for the Bears when he was playing in Jacksonville. He was their number one wide receiver pretty much after his rookie season onwards. This dude, obviously, he's he's one of those guys that can just very much get the job done. He has phenomenal hands when it comes to a 50-50 ball. You put the ball in his hands, he catches it, comes down with it. Great. 6'2", 220 pounds. So he's a big physical guy that I have a lot of faith in. Obviously, looking at his stats here, his best year came all the way back in 2015. In his sophomore year, where he got 1,400 yards, 14 receiving touchdowns. But taking his look at his last 4 years here with Chicago, obviously his last year he only managed 410 yards and one receiving touchdown. Really wasn't used properly, in my opinion, by Matt Nagy and Chicago. So this is a little bit of a tough situation. Obviously, Allen Robinson has never had great quarterback play. Obviously, when he was in Jacksonville, he had Blake Bortles. Then coming over to Chicago, he had Nick Foles, Chase Daniels, and Mitchell Trubisky all throwing him the ball. And at some points, he had Justin Fields, but he was again playing under that Matt Nagy system that just really didn't work. So now that he's going over to LA and he's playing with Matthew Stafford and all the weapons that they have on offense, like he's not going to be the number one guy, obviously, with Cooper Kupp there. He's going to have a phenomenal year. I think you could easily see him put up career career numbers for the Rams. And obviously, taking a look here at his contract that he signed, 3 years, $46.5 million a year, not bad at all. His average annual salary is 15.5, so very very good money for what he's worth.
Yeah, and that's the key thing too, is that fact that he's not going to be the number one guy. I think that's going to free him up and give him opportunities to really shine again, because he, after that rookie season and those flashes, and then that sophomore year with Blake Bortles putting up 1,400, defenses learn that if he's the number one guy, you got to double him. Whereas now he's going to a team where you can't double him, because then Cooper Kupp is going to get free. And so that is going to make a very dangerous 1-2 tandem, and that doesn't even factor in all the other weapons that they have in LA. So yeah, I definitely agree. I think Robinson's going to have a big breakout year for him. Big boom, good contract, and then you know when they start shutting down Kupp, you've got Allen Robinson. The Rams are going to be dangerous this year.
So moving over to our final boom player that we think, obviously I am going to throw Alex Cappa, obviously coming over from Tampa Bay to now Cincinnati. His main purpose was coming over and being like, hey, you are going to protect Joe Burrow at all possible costs. You know, coming from obviously blocking for Tom Brady in past years, the last 2 years, done a really, really good job. Obviously has a lot of high end playoff experience these last couple years playing with Tampa Bay and Tom Brady. So him coming over to the Cincinnati Bengals is a huge move. And I think honestly the only reason that he signed with Cincinnati is because he was going to be able to guard or block for Joe Burrow. Obviously, when Kappa comes over, he's going to be playing the guard role. He was doing a very similar thing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Uh, he's also stayed fairly healthy all the games that he's played over the last 3 years. Obviously, 3 years ago, 13 games started, 13 games played in, 16 played in all 16 games the year after, and all 17 games the year before. So the injury, you're not concerned with that at all. So obviously, the Bengals are looking at him going, he's going to stay healthy and he's going to be on the field for us. And honestly, they didn't really give him a too bad of a deal. 4 years, $35 million. Average annual salary of 8.75. To me, I look at that to go get a premier guard in this league to help out your quarterback who got sacked a bunch. He's going to help out a lot, and plus he's going to be able to help out in that run game with Joe Mixon.
Well, that's exactly it. Yeah. And they needed to address that issue of Joe Burrow getting sacked as much as he was. Because if they really want to have a franchise that is a perennial playoff team, always going to the conference championship and win some Super Bowls, you got to keep Joe Burrow on his feet, and you got to keep him healthy. And the key to that was fixing that offensive line, because it was it was pretty brutal last year. Like the things Joe Burrow was able to do with that O line was just amazing. And to have a little bit more protection this year, it's I'm not looking forward to watching the Bengals play, being a Steelers fan. So
So now moving over to our bust type of players. Again, we don't necessarily think these players are bad players. It's a mixture of situation, contract, and that kind of stuff. So Sterling, take it away with our first air quotes bust player.
yeah, this was the one that we had as a consensus between us this year, and that is coming from the LA Rams last year at the end of the year, joining the Buffalo Bills, Von Miller. They signed him to a massive contract. I believe it was 6 years. Was it 120 million?
120 million. Yep.
Yeah. And honestly, at his age, being a 33-year-old linebacker, they're bringing him in to almost be the linchpin in this defense, and I just don't think he's going to fill that role adequately. You know, like we look at the numbers he's had over the last few years. Obviously, the Denver Broncos traded him last year to the Rams. He won himself a Super Bowl, and then went and signed a big contract with the Bills. I don't see him putting up the same sort of numbers that he has over the last several years in Denver. You know, he's in a good defense, but I think as good as the Bills are going to be, we're just not going to see the numbers from Von Miller that warrant that contract that the Buffalo Bills paid.
Yeah, for $120 million for the next 6 years. Obviously, Von Miller currently is 33 years old, so this deal would bring him all the way up until he's 39. And realistically, I just look at this. I don't look at Von Miller playing until he's 39. And you look at the last couple of years, Von Miller still been a very, very productive edge rusher. Like he's always hovering around that 10 sacks a year type of thing. But his last 2 years in Denver, obviously his back in 2019 he got 8 sacks, didn't play at all in 2020 due to injuries. But for when he was playing with the Broncos this year, he was at 4.5 sacks, then obviously moves over to LA where he was playing alongside Aaron Donald and only managed to get 5 sacks in 8 games. So it is a little bit one of those things where the production value is definitely starting to decline slowly. And with this entire deal for Von Miller, the Bills aren't looking at this deal for years 3, 4, 5, and 6. They're really looking at it at years 1 and 2. But the fact that they went out and signed Von Miller to the $120 million guaranteed, or $120 million total contract with $51 million guaranteed, it's you kind of look at it and go, for a team that is very Super Bowl hungry, it's not a bad move to try to sign one of these guys, but it's gonna come back to bite you in a couple years if he's still playing and has not decided to retire.
Yeah, I think he was overpriced. Like they just paid too much for Von Miller.
So for our next bust player that we have is actually going to be Christian Kirk. Again, I we both like Christian Kirk and what he was capable of doing throughout his time in Arizona. Obviously, when he was playing, he was a second round pick. Went into Arizona, he was playing behind Larry Fitzgerald. He was always kind of touted to be that guy to take the reins after Larry Fitzgerald left. Played 2 years with him, and then obviously they brought in DeAndre Hopkins, and he was kind of subjugated to kind of that backup or number two role with DeAndre Hopkins being the main guy, of course, because you're going to throw to D Hop as opposed to anyone else before. So, kind of looking at his career stats, never been a guy who's gotten over 1,000 yards. You know, his highest number for yards was this past year at 982. So he got really, really close, but he just wasn't capable of breaking it. But he's never also gotten anything over 6 touchdowns. So again, looking at what we see here from Christian Kirk, the dude obviously very talented, but for me the biggest thing that comes with this is the Jacksonville Jaguars gave him a 4-year deal, $72 million, $37 million guaranteed. to me, that is a lot of money they are giving to a guy that hasn't been able to produce. We see it all the time with players who have superstar wide receivers ahead of them still be able to get 1,000 yards. To me, obviously DeAndre Hopkins didn't play fully last year, so he was kind of put to that number one receiver role. But obviously, yeah, the Cardinals didn't want to give him that contract, and they decided to go with Marquise Brown instead when they traded for him. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see if this contract comes back to bite them.
Well, yeah, and even with those several weeks as the number one in Arizona, he still wasn't able to bump his numbers up enough to be over 1,000. And that's a hefty contract to be giving a guy that you're going to bring in to be your number one and has not shown he can, you know, get it done in the red zone and get a bunch of touchdowns for you, or put up a lot of yards, get over 1,000 in a season. So yeah, he's got a good quarterback. That might be the only thing that saves him this year. But with the amount they're paying him, they're paying him what, top 15 wide receiver dollars, and I don't think he's in the top 15.
Yeah, yeah, it's he's getting an average annual salary of $18 million a year, which puts him very close to potentially even that top five.
Yeah.
Which again, for a guy who is a good wide receiver by all accounts, just isn't necessarily maybe worth that much. So the last player that we have here on our boom or our bus list, excuse me, is actually Teron Armstead. Went over from the New Orleans Saints, now over to the Miami Dolphins. Coming out in this particular offseason, he was rated as the number one offensive lineman. I don't really think there was going to be too much argument with that. I like the move by Miami to give a little bit more help to Tua Tagovailoa. But again, the one thing that I always look at with Armstead is his availability. He has yet to play a full season of football. He's always up and down on the injury reserve. Like last season, he only played in 8 games. The year before, 14, 15. So those 2 years, 2019 and 2020, both good years for availability. The year before, 2018, only was in 10 games. Same thing in 2017. 2016, played in 7. 2015, 13. 2014, 14 games, but in his rookie year in 2013, he played in 6 games. So again, he is kind of one of those guys that is one of the best tackles in the league when he's playing, but that's just the thing, is his availability. How much are you actually going to be able to have him on the field? I know for both of us, when we were looking at improving our offensive line, we both looked at this particular guy and said it's great, but we're going to have to give him a ton of money to potentially not see him on the field for the entire year. He signed a 5-year $75 million deal, obviously 31 years old, so he's going to be playing till he's about 36. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it is, again, it's just for me, his just lack of availability and him not being able to play on the field. And once you start to get older, start to show up a little bit more on that injury reserve list, and to guarantee $43 million, it's good move by Miami if he can stay healthy, but he's just yet to prove that he can stay healthy.
Well, and it's going to be a tough year as well. Like it's his first year on a new team, so he's going to a new system. Miami has got a new head coach. They've got a new offensive system that they're trying to set up as well. So it's going to be a bit of a shift for Tua Tagovailoa as well. It Everything's just sort of pointing in the direction of this maybe not being his best season. You know, and with those on-field issues of whether will he play, won't he play, that makes it tough. And that's why, throughout the offseason when we were talking about, who would we rather, like, yeah, Teron Armstead was the number one, but I think we both were looking more at Alex Cappa going, yeah, we'd rather our team sign that guy because at least we know he's got the consistency, the availability, and we're going to get him for cheaper.
Yeah, and I think obviously if you're looking for an offensive lineman, one of the biggest things that you do look for is his availability and the ability to stay on the field. And obviously once he's on the field, him to play at a high level. And just unfortunately for Armstead, when he's on the field, he's one of the very, very best. But it's just one of those things where we just don't see him on the field enough.